Good afternoon. Welcome to the Cannabis Regulation Commission meeting. Today is Thursday, February 9th, 2023. The time now is 2:01 p.m. Before we begin, I'm going to go over some general instructions. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being conducted virtually via Zoom and is being live streamed on DCR's website. Those who wish to watch this meeting may do so by visiting cannabis.lacity.org and clicking the About menu item on the top. Under the About menu, click the Commission Meetings link. Scroll down to the bottom of the Commission Meetings page to find the live stream. You can also listen to this meeting by calling 213-621-2489 or 818-904-9450 and selecting the number for this meeting. Those who wish to offer public comment may call 877-853-5257 or 888-475-4499. Enter meeting ID 860-838-7310. These numbers can also be found on the agenda for this meeting. Agendas for today's meeting can be found on the department's website at cannabis.lacity.org and navigating to the commission page under the About menu. This meeting is being recorded, therefore we ask commissioners, staff, and members of the public to please state your name clearly when you speak. The audio file will be posted online within 48 hours of the meeting. If you're on in the Zoom call, when the item you wish to speak on is called, press star 9 to get on the speaking queue. We will call out each speaker by the last 4 digits of their phone number to identify the caller. The caller will be prompted to unmute themselves by dialing star 6. If there are no other items you wish to speak on, you may disconnect from this call, and view the meeting via the live stream or dial council phone to listen only. We'll be following the agenda order. Today's presentation to the Commission will be available on the department's website within 2 business days from the meeting. We'll consider general public comment and single or multiple agenda items together. Speakers will have 1 minute for general public comment and 1 minute per item with a maximum of 2 minutes for multiple items. Each of the speakers should state whether they are providing general public comment and/or which other items they are speaking on before they begin to comment, so that we can appropriately time them. If the speaker does not specify which items they are speaking on, only 1 minute will be provided. With that, we'll go ahead and open the general public comment and single or multiple agenda items. Speakers can address the Commission on non-agenda related items, provided they are within the jurisdiction of this Commission, or provide public comment for items in today's agenda by dialing star 9 on your telephone. If you're listening on the live stream and have called to provide public comment, please make sure you mute the live stream audio before you begin to eliminate feedback. Commissioners and staff, please mute your microphones. Ms. Treviso, please call the first speaker.
If anyone wishes to provide public comment, please dial star 9. President On, there are no callers on the queue.
Let's give it just a few more minutes. While we're waiting, I see Commissioner Figueroa Villa has also joined. Today we're also joined by Vice President Mason, Crockett, Commissioners Crockett, Figueroa Villa, and Naro. We also have DCR's Interim Executive Director, Michelle Grockian, along with members of the department and the City Attorney's staff. Okay, I don't see any callers. Let's go ahead and close both the general public comment agenda item and single or multiple agenda item periods and move on to commission business. Item number 1, commissioners, you should have an advance calendar in front of you for our future meeting dates. Please advise at this time if there are any planned absences from any of the commissioners today. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the approval of the minutes. We have 2 minutes to approve today. The first, we were sent the minutes of December 29th, 2022 for review. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
This is Vice President Mason. I move to approve.
Okay, we've got a
Commissioner
motion.
Nero, I second.
All right, so we've got a motion from Vice President Mason to approve the minutes for December 29th, 2022. We have a second from Commissioner Naro. Ms. Trevizo, please call the roll.
Vice President Mason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Naro, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Crockett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Figueroa Villa, how do you vote?
Aye.
And President On, how do you vote?
Aye.
The vote is 5-0 and the motion passes.
Okay, so the second set of approval of minutes, we were sent the minutes of January 19th, 2023 for review. Do I have a motion to approve those minutes?
This is Vice President Mason. I move we approve the minutes.
Vice President Mason with the motion. Do we have a second?
Commissioner Nero, I second the motion.
Commissioner Naro with the second. Ms. Trevizo, please call the roll.
I have a question. Do I abstain since I wasn't in that meeting?
That's correct, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Figueroa Villa, you were in attendance at the January 19th meeting.
Oh, okay, I see. I wasn't December 15th. Okay, I see that now. Thank you.
You're welcome. Vice President Mason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Naro, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Crockett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Figueroa Villa, how do you vote?
Aye.
President On, how do you vote?
Aye.
The vote is 5-0 and the motion passes.
Okay. Moving on to commission announcements and updates and any future agenda requests. Do we have any at this time?
I have a question, but I don't know if it's appropriate or not. I know Mayor's office is going through and reviewing commissions and staff and all of that stuff. Do we know what's happening with our commission in terms of commissioners? Because I'm sort of hesitant to put it on the agenda or for anything because I want to be able to be here to follow up on things. So I was just wondering if we can talk about that a little, or maybe not, or maybe I should just wait and see.
Yeah, this is President Robert On. I think that is kind of outside of the scope of today's meeting.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, that's just, it's, your call if you would like to make a future agenda request, or again, right now we're asking for commission announcements, updates, or future agenda requests. So if you'd like to provide input or request a future agenda item, now is a good time to do it. Otherwise, we can postpone it to a future date.
Okay, let's postpone. It's fine. I get it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Aye.
Vice
This
President
is Vice
Mason?
President Mason. Yes, I have an acknowledgement. Dr. Imani Brown, I happened to catch your interview with Dominique DePrima on KBLA on Thursday the 2nd, and I just wanted to thank you for appearing in that space on behalf of the city to bring some balance, because they do hear a lot from the social equity community and very rarely from the city on the social equity program. You did a great job. You were very thorough, very succinct, very informative, and you represented the department well. So thank you for making yourself available.
Thank you, Vice President Mason, for acknowledging Dr. Imani Brown. Kudos to Dr. Brown for your appearance. Appreciate you representing us as always. Any other announcements or updates at this time? Okay, let's close out item number 1. We'll move to item number 2. This is the finding to continue teleconference meetings pursuant to AB 361, which requires that all legislative bodies make findings concerning the state of emergency stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic to continue holding virtual meetings. Do I have a motion to approve and continue teleconference meetings pursuant to AB 361? Commissioners?
This is Vice President Mason. I'll make the motion. I was trying to let someone else jump in, but I do move that the commission determine in accordance with AB 361, Section 3E, subsection 3, that this legislative body has considered the circumstances of the state of emergency and that the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of members to meet safely in person and/or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing.
Thank you, Vice President Mason. Do we have a second?
I'll second. This is Commissioner Figueroa.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have a second from Commissioner Figueroa. Ms. Treviso, please call the roll.
Vice President Mason, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Figueroa Villa, how do you vote? Commissioner Crockett, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Naro, how do you vote?
Aye.
Vice President, President On, how do you vote?
Yes, aye.
The vote is 5-0 and the motion passes.
Thank you. Let's move on to item number 3. We have a short agenda today, so this is the last item. Item number 3 is the report on the licensing program. I believe Mr. Jason Colleen is here to report back.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Jason Clean, Assistant Executive Director for the Department of Cannabis Regulation. Today, I just wanted to provide a brief report back on the status of Council File number 21-1083-S1. Next slide, please. For this Council File number, DCR began working on it back in April of 2022. We spent 6 months meeting with stakeholders to identify and develop courses of action to improve our local cannabis regulations. And on October 13th, 2022, we transmitted a comprehensive report making over a dozen recommendations to amend our section of the municipal code to reorganize, clarify, and establish necessary procedures for the administration of our commercial cannabis licensing and social equity programs. And then next slide, please. Our report was heard on November 1st, 2022. The Planning and Land Use Management Committee, which is our policy committee, heard the report, and they only moved 1.5 recommendations out and asked us to report back. So the recommendations they moved were, they adopted the aggregation of social equity interests, which allows multiple social equity individual applicants to meet the necessary equity share requirements for their application and license to be considered a social equity license. The other component was they adopted a portion of the relocation recommendation that the department had submitted. They created a pathway for the relocation of an application. However, they struck the ability for licensees to relocate out of their community plan area. And then they instructed DCR to report back on the remaining amendments. And City Council adopted the Plum Committee report on November 22nd of 2022. Next slide, please. On December 7th, DCR transmitted its report back on the original report. Unfortunately, that report was never scheduled. We did make the same recommendations. We think they're all important. And then earlier this month on February 3rd, we transmitted an amended report which removed components of our previous proposal. One of our proposals was to add a December 31st, 2022 sunset date for applicants using the original equity share criteria that was utilized in 2019. Of course, that date has since passed, so we removed that recommendation. The second component was the removal of our recommendation to amend the definition of undue concentration. DCR was instructed not to make all of our retail storefront application spots available through the lottery that we administered last year. So we need to pull the recommendation to change undue concentration until such time the city has conducted additional lotteries to give applicants the opportunity to fill those licensing spots. If we don't wait to adopt that recommendation, it could reduce the number of application spots available because it changes the trigger for undue concentration from the time a license is issued to the time an application is accepted by the department. And that would have a dramatic impact on applicants if we haven't made all of those application spots available. So we could lose between 150 or 200 spots if it's adopted earlier. So we're proposing to take that off of the table now so that the department has the opportunity to conduct additional lotteries to fill out the rest of the application spots. And then we can go ahead and work with the city council to change the trigger. And then finally, we've made recommendations to extend the refiling periods. A number of social equity applicants and others have identified that it's hard for them to find compliant properties, as well as the uncertainty surrounding what's going to happen with the future definition of undue concentration. Are there additional opportunities going to be available, et cetera? So what we've proposed is to give folks up to 3 years, which is an additional 2 years, to refile an application, as well as create a pathway for folks that have their licenses expire to come back into the regulatory process within 3 years. All licenses do have to be approved on an annual basis. And if a licensee is unable to renew their lease with a landlord at the end of their licensing term, and that doesn't give them a lot of time to find a new compliant location. So what we're proposing to do is create a pathway so that somebody could allow their license to expire, and once they've identified a new location, they can come back into the process, as opposed to spending thousands of dollars to file relocation requests just to hold on to that opportunity. And then if that property doesn't work out, they have to spend thousands of dollars again to then try to find another property. So this is intended to help the industry and help our applicants and licensees save money and give them a better chance to be successful within this process without losing those opportunities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly move through some of our recommendations. I'm going to focus on the areas where there's nuanced differences between the original report and the new proposals. And then I will give the commission, of course, an opportunity to ask me any questions they may have. I will be doing a lunch and learn next week where I go more into depth with recommendations with our stakeholders and give them the opportunity to do the Q&A session. So I won't belabor the issue today. The other component, which is the biggest component of the report, is of course establishing the annual licensing process. There are a number of things based on local requirements and state requirements that have created issues and roadblocks for our local applicants and licensees. The biggest roadblock, of course, is the state is going to sunset their provisional license process, and all of their applicants are going to be transitioned to an annual licensing process if they have not already received a provisional license. For folks that do have a provisional license, the state's going to allow at least 2 more renewal periods so that folks can continue to operate under a provisional while they work towards annual licensure. The biggest concern of the department right now is, in order for somebody to have a complete state application, they must have an adopted environmental analysis. And the city cannot adopt the environmental findings until the discretionary action, which is the issuance of the annual license, is also adopted. Under the current code, businesses have to meet all of the permitting requirements, including the new health permit requirement, before they can have the complete application and be eligible for a final inspection. So of our 700 businesses, only a small fraction have met all of the building permit, fire permit, health permit requirements to actually have a complete annual application. What the department is proposing is to shift the permitting requirement in the final inspection until after an annual licensing determination has been made. There's two benefits to that. The first benefit is, one, most of our applicants are social equity applicants who don't have access to traditional capital, and it's very expensive to pursue any type of discretionary license, whether it's at the local level or at the state level. So by creating a process that allows for them to get a definitive answer as to whether or not they are going to meet the requirements for licensure before they have sunk costs associated with renting a location, doing tens of thousands of dollars in permitting and build outs to make the location compliant, giving them a yes, you're going to meet the requirements as long as you do A, B, and C, or hey, this location doesn't meet the requirements or you're not going to be able to do what you want to do there, has always been one of the core things for the department to reduce those holding costs and make sure that folks aren't wasting money. So by shifting the permitting requirements to after, it's basically creating a pseudo entitlement process where on paper they can meet all of the requirements, they get non-operational authorization, and then they have the ability to then take that non-operational authorization to the state, to building and safety, to the fire department, to the public health department to get all of the necessary permits and licenses from those entities. Then they come back to the city or DCR and say, hey, I have all of these. We go through a clearance process to validate it all, make them eligible for a final inspection. And then if they pass their final inspection, they can begin to operate because now we as a department have verified that they have all of the necessary documentation and permits and licenses to lawfully operate. So that protects them. And it also gives them peace of mind that if they are successful in getting all of the other permits and licenses necessary to operate, they will be able to operate and DCR will make their license operational. Again, the other component is we're coming out of the pandemic now. So unfortunately, our industry is a new industry. We had 2 years, 2018 and 2019, where we were starting to get things up and running and folks were getting into the swing. And then our applicants and licensees were hit with the pandemic, where a lot of organizations shut down. That left to significant delays with pulling building permits and doing inspections. Same thing with the fire department, negotiating contracts with other governmental agencies, such as the county, to implement the public health requirements. Those were all delayed. And unfortunately, the state regulatory structure doesn't take into account all of those delays that applicants and licensees have faced. So we believe it's only fair to, one, extend the renewal periods for those folks, as well as give them more time to comply with these other agencies that DCR has no control over and can't direct to issue the necessary permits and licenses. However, DCR can do the things that are under its purview and then make a recommendation to do the review of those other agencies' paperwork after the fact. And we think that that will keep this process moving. So we've met with the industry. The industry is very supportive of it. We've met with different council members and their representatives, and it appears that they're very supportive of it. And now it's just a matter of getting these recommendations heard in the Planning and Land Use Management Committee and then getting it moved to full council for consideration so that the city attorney's office can work with us on drafting the ordinances necessary to effectuate it. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we're making a recommendation here to amend the 10406D, which would give folks that have the temporary approvals the ability to renew those temporary approvals through February 28th, 2027, and that covers the 2027 calendar year. This would give folks the additional opportunity to continue to renew their temporary approval license while they work towards annual licensure, either at the local or the state level. By shifting the final inspection until after we've made a determination that they're eligible for an annual license. That annual license, of course, would not be operational until they pass their final inspection. So by doing the shift, we're guaranteeing folks have the opportunity to get their state annual license before 2025, but they still may be working with county public health, the fire department, or building and safety on the other permits. So if they have their state license and they have their local temporary approval license, they can still continue to operate while they're working towards the other agency's permitting requirements. So this kind of ensures that if there are delays with fire department, building and safety, LA County Public Health, that the businesses don't have to shut down, they don't have to lay off staff, and the industry, especially the regulated industry, can keep moving forward. So we think this is a no-brainer. We're also making the clarification that any application abandoned after July 1st of 2023 has to be refiled as an annual application. Given the fact that the state is phasing out their provisional licensing process, our temporary approval process is not going to help anybody that doesn't have the corresponding state provisional license. Next slide, please. For item H, what we're doing here is we're making the recommendation to extend the refiling process. So currently, applications and records that are abandoned can be refiled for up to 1 year. We're looking to extend that to 3 calendar years. Of course, social equity, individual applicants and businesses have come to this body and, talked about how difficult it is to find compliant locations, to raise capital, to meet all of these regulatory requirements. So by extending the refiling period from 1 year to 3 years, it gives folks longer periods of time to find compliant locations, work with other governmental agencies, and make good business decisions. Folks that are in a position to make those decisions earlier are not going to be penalized. They can come back right back into the process. But for folks that can't find the location, they're having capital issues, it gives them a longer period of time to hopefully get all of their ducks in a row and then come back and be successful within our regulatory structure. So again, this should be a no-brainer. It's really just giving folks additional time to come back into the process when they're ready. Next slide, please. Item I is the biggest one within the report. This is actually the creation of the standalone annual licensing process. So what we're doing here is, again, in order to get a determination of completeness, an applicant would have to pass an initial inspection. When temporary approval gets phased out, the only inspection available is the final inspection. And we're proposing to shift that until after we've made a determination that the applicant meets the requirements for receiving an annual license. One, this will shift the inspection until after the commission, the director, and the community meetings are held, but it does allow for us to move the environmental clearance forward, which is a requirement for the state annual application process. The other component is with the phase out of the temporary approval process, folks will need to pay their annual application fee when they submit the application, or there's nothing there for DCR to work on. So we're making those changes to reflect the future state where there won't be a standalone temporary approval process. And then the final piece, of course, is it would allow for DCR to conduct the final inspection and, when applicable, schedule community meetings, and those two things have to be completed before an annual license is considered operational. Next slide. For here, this is where we are shifting the burden for the final inspection until later in the process. So a licensee can't be referred for a final inspection until they have all of the necessary permits and licenses and authorizations to comply with local law. Of course, the applicant or licensee can't get a state annual license until they've completed the city's annual license process. So this now will streamline that so that they can meet the local requirements. They can go to the state, get their state annual license, and then after that, they would be eligible for the final inspection, which would make their city annual license operational. With some of the changes that the state did last year, it created a process that didn't work cohesively. And we're trying to update our local regulations to reflect that so that folks can seamlessly move through our process without getting stuck with either our agency, the state agency, or another city agency. And for folks that are non-operational, which means that they haven't received all of the necessary permits or licenses, then they'll still have the ability to maintain that non-operational license. And then at such time that they are operational, that's when they would start to pay for the annual inspections and the other things to make sure that they continue to be compliant. Next slide, please. For this one, what we're doing is basically community meetings only apply to retail storefront and non-retail storefront with business premises less than the 30,000 square feet. For the business premises that are greater than 30,000 square feet, the difference in the square footage and the scale of the activity is captured as part of the environmental review. So instead of having applicants submit multiple applications, which are standalone records, to circumvent the 30,000 square foot caveat here, it just makes sense to remove that language so that when they submit their project, we can review all of the activities that they want to conduct at a particular location and include that in the project analysis. And this is a way to stay consistent with the intent of CEQA, as well as reduce the burden on the applicant. So we think this is a no-brainer. For the retail storefront and the micro business with on-site sales, we are required to basically notify them when there's a complete application. This requirement only applies to licenses with on-site sales. So we want to make sure that folks clearly know which license types are the ones that allow for the on-site sales. So this is more of a clarification. It's not a policy change. Next slide, please. For this one, the language is kind of just inconsistent with some of the other sections of the code that have been amended. So the commission is the first level decision maker for licenses for retail storefront. And there are certain licensees are phase 1 applicants, the first 100 from phase 3 retail round 1, that either were exempted from a finding of undue concentration or their application doesn't count toward the calculation of undue concentration. So all of that to say, you may have an applicant in a community plan area considered to be unduly concentrated that can't get a public convenience or necessity finding from the city council because they were never required to. So all we're doing here is changing the language so that we can only consider the issuance of the license if they are subject to that finding of undue concentration and their application is in an area subject to that, because those are the folks that can go through the city council process to request a public convenience or necessity finding. So that's really just so that we don't create a roadblock for them as we start to move forward with the annual licenses. For the next one, this is to clean up the appeal process. For the recommendations, the applicant, if there's a denial, would be the aggrieved party for the decision. There's a finite number of reasons that either the department or the commission can deny an applicant. And those are primarily related to public safety related concerns. And as part of the community meeting process and the stakeholder outreach, those concerns would be raised and brought to the commission as part of the hearing process. And ultimately, if the commission found that a business did represent a public safety issue, the commission would have the authority to deny the issuance of an annual license to that retail storefront business. And really the applicant would be the aggrieved party by the denial. So this kind of makes sure that it's the applicant initiating the appeal process, not the applicant's cousin or other folks that may claim to be aggrieved, but are not directly associated with the decision. And again, there's only a finite number of reasons that either the department or the commission can deny the issuance of a license. And if it doesn't fit into that box, unfortunately, it's not something that could be overturned through an appeal. So this is more of a cleanup. Next slide, please. And we could go to the next slide. I think it'll say end of agenda item. Next slide. There we go.
Thank you, Mr. Killeen. At this time, I want to open up the floor to the commissioners for questions or deliberations.
Okay, I'll go. This is Vice President Mason. I was trying to give space to the other commissioners, but thank you for your report. I am pleased with what I'm hearing. I think that this represents great strides towards identifying barriers and creating continuity for businesses in the face of those barriers, for operating this program with a sense of compassion for the difficulties for this program since its inception, and therefore for the social equity community since its inception, either by lack of funding or lack of staffing or just really policies that just didn't really quite work. But in the words of former Director Kat Packer, it's an experiment, a social experiment, as is all politics. And so the onus is on the department to look at that science and figure out what works and doesn't work. And I think that this is demonstrative of the fact that the department is doing just that and digging in and leaning in and conducting the analysis of the code to make improvements to benefit our deliverables. And I appreciate the spirit of cooperation I'm hearing, wherein you've listened to the complaints from the social equity community and other license applicants and from this commission and incorporated that into your work. So thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Vice President. Commissioners, any other questions or comments for Mr. Killeen? Mr. Killeen, I actually have a couple questions. You had mentioned in there that you had received some feedback or input from the industry. What kind of industry folks are we getting feedback from?
All of them.
Okay.
The director has made it a point to meet with various stakeholders, social equity groups, with varying opinions, the various advisory boards for commercial cannabis regulation within our state, different neighborhood councils, public organization groups, folks that represent neighborhood organizations, folks that are lobbying different council members on related policy, whether it's taxation, dealing with the number of businesses, looking to increase the cap of businesses or decrease the cap of the businesses, folks that are cognizant that, you know, at the local and state level, licenses can't be transferred. They're not considered a standalone asset. And that's articulated in our code, which makes it difficult for folks because if you do have to relocate, you are changing your entity, you have to submit a brand new application. And that holds true at the local and the state level. And with the state transitioning away from provisional licensure, anytime somebody wants to make that material change, it's going to be a lengthy process unless we at the local level can streamline our process to help move people into the state queue sooner, which can't be done under local law as well as state law right now. So these are all things that we are aware of, and Michelle has been doing an amazing job trying to meet with all of these different folks and get their input and try to develop consensus on various items, because folks have concern of like, well, if we allow a licensee to relocate, that impacts social equity applicants, but social equity applicants are also licensees. So if you prevent one group from doing it, it has an effect on everybody. And what we as a department can do is try to make more locations within the city available to folks that they can find compliant properties, so that hopefully the Department of City Planning and the council will be willing to relax some of the rules and give some discretion to city administrators so that we can work within kind of the ever evolving realm of cannabis regulation. And it's too hard to keep going back to this body and to the city council and to other departments every time a law changes, and it breaks our ability to regulate in a compassionate way. So we're meeting with everybody. So if you have somebody who has concerns about the process, they have suggestions, please send them our way, so that we can hear those concerns, we can hear those suggestions, and we can figure out a way to factor them into future recommendations and presentations.
That's great. I'm really happy that we are reaching out to the industry folks because we really need to hear from them what's happening on the ground, the changes that need to be made, and frankly, whether these steps are working or not for these not just the applicants but the license holders. And so I just want to encourage you to continue, that this department continue to reach out and work, closely with the various stakeholders. And with that feedback, I think we can implement the changes that are necessary to make the system work for those folks. But there's a lot of competing interests, so I'm very well aware of that as well. So it's really important that we get a broad cross section of input. And based on that input, then we as a department can take those data points and decide what is best for the industry and the various stakeholders. Ms. Grakian, I see your hand up.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking time to listen. I know that you all have heard these recommendations a few times now, so I appreciate your patience and willingness to sit through another explanation. But I just wanted to make note that, it's my personal policy to take a meeting and to respond to anybody who emails me or calls me. A lot of these recommendations have come from Jason and the team, putting our heads together based on a lot of either individual or stakeholder outreach with a variety of different groups, some of which are scheduled on a bi-monthly basis, some of which, we speak with here and there. But, there's several recommendations that you will find that are based on people's personal experience. And for example, we have one recommendation that is looking at extending the timeline to pay renewal fees. This industry is going through a very difficult time right now. Cash is not readily available. Cannabis is having a little bit of a recession. So whatever relief we can provide to individuals to, help pay their renewal fees so they don't have to make a decision between that or paying staff, that's something that we should consider. And we hope that the council sees it similarly, in that this department needs to listen to our stakeholders, all of them, and needs to pivot with the industry and the times. So that's our goal over here. As I mentioned when I came on last April. It's to be more business friendly and to be more receptive. We are purely the vessels for administering the law, but when the law is not making sense or it's not flexible to respond to a challenged industry, we need to be able to pivot as necessary. So that's what you're seeing reflected in a lot of these new amendments. Thank
Yes,
you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Grok, and I really appreciate those comments. It is important that we are business friendly. Mr. Clean used a great word, compassionate, practices and policies. A lot of these folks have had so much trouble over the last, several years getting up and running. And so I think it's really important that we continue to provide, relief where needed, and certainly compassion is in order. Another question that I had, Mr. Killeen, I noticed that for the relocations that it was only applicable to the applicants and not the license holders. Do you have any insight as to why that carve out was made? Because I think the department had proposed relocation opportunities for license holders as well, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
I believe the differentiation between applicant and licensee stems from what happened back in 2019 when the council made the policy decision to suspend relocations in order to ensure that phase 3 round 1 applicants wouldn't have to deal with uncertainty surrounding existing licensees competing for properties. And what we've been advocating for is, and explaining to folks, is you can't just move a license. So if somebody seeks to relocate, they're submitting a brand new application for that particular property. And if somebody else is already in the queue, just because somebody's a licensee, it's not going to bump an applicant out of the way. But licensees have their own challenges. They may not be able to renew a lease. They may not have an opportunity to expand or meet different regulatory requirements. So preventing them from complying with fire code, building code, public health code, et cetera, and not creating a relief valve just means that they're going to have to go out of business. And because of the nature of the licensing program and different restrictions, they may or may not ever be able to pursue that activity again, which is unfair. So our recommendation, one, would allow for a license to be transferable. And then two, it would create a pathway for licensees to go through the same process as an applicant. And then the longer term plan is to utilize some of the $22 million grant money so that the Department of City Planning can dust off the programmatic environmental review for the regulatory structure, hopefully build in some flexibility for more properties within the city to become available for commercial cannabis licensure, so that our social equity applicants have more spots available that they can negotiate with. And, for the folks that have been successful in getting licenses, if something changes, then of course they would have the opportunity to stay in our process and find a new compliant location. And that's the goal. And a lot of it's just about building in the flexibility, and then making sure that folks are on equal footing. I mean, the workaround for the licensees not being able to do it is we're right now in the 2023 renewal process at the tail end. So if your landlord said, I'm not going to renew with you, and that, you could have submitted your 2023 renewal application, failed to pay your fees, and then the department would abandon your 2023 application, and then that would open up the refiling process. But that's great for somebody who has a landlord-tenant dispute, but what about the person who just needs to move to a larger facility? What about the person who has an opportunity to purchase a facility as opposed to lease a facility? Those types of business decisions are off the table when licensees can't move a license.
Yeah, I look, I'm for, these folks, and I've gotten, I've had conversations with folks that are running into the exact issues that you just described, just from a pure real estate perspective. And so I know that these restrictions are very difficult for a lot of these, license holders. So, and by the way, those are also social equity folks, right? So,
The vast majority of the folks having problems with relocations are social equity individual applicants that came in through phase two, which was the non-retail component. So those businesses got the benefit of coming in because they were a supplier of the existing medical marijuana dispensaries, but none of those locations were properly permitted from a building standpoint or a fire permit standpoint for extraction equipment, for cultivation equipment, for all of the lights and the heavy infrastructure that goes into the non-retail activities. So for those folks that are now having to meet those permitting requirements to qualify for annual licensure, these agencies are saying, hey, it's going to, you need to do A, B, and C. You need to input fire sprinklers, for instance. And then the landlord says, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. That's $100,000 tenant improvement. No. And now what are you going to do? You can't comply with fire because you can't put in the sprinklers. Your landlord won't let you do it. So your only option would be to either not comply and lose your license, or to relocate to a location that is either properly permitted or your landlord's willing to work with you to allow you to pull the permits necessary to comply with building and fire. Again, we're a regulatory body and we want businesses to be successful as long as they can meet the regulatory requirements. And to the extent that we as a city are creating barriers that prevent them from complying with our regulations, and we're not working to make it easier for them to comply or giving them the opportunity to comply, it decimates this infant industry, and it discourages people from trying to come out of the unlicensed space into the licensed and regulated space, which of course contributes to larger problems within the city.
Yeah, it's very concerning. How widespread, Mr. Killeen, do you estimate this problem is? As we get to the annual, I think as part of the public health requirements with the county, that's going to trigger all the compliance with the building and safety and the fire life safety as well.
Correct. So of our over 700 businesses that have provisional licenses to operate, about a dozen of them have received their public health permits. So if we were to impose an annual licensing requirement today, less than 20 of our 700 businesses would actually have a complete application and be able to navigate through that process. And as you mentioned, when they go to apply for their health permit, they have to demonstrate to LA County Public Health, which isn't part of the city family, nor does DCR have the authority to instruct them to do anything. They say, well, show me your building permits, show me your fire permits. Can you meet these public health requirements? And if they can't get their health permit, which means they can't get to a complete local application, which means that they never get the final inspection. They don't go to the community meeting, and ultimately they could lose their local license as well as lose their state provisional license. So we need to fix this now. And really, for the success of the industry, there's a lot of urgency there. And unfortunately, the director doesn't have the discretion to ignore the municipal code. But what we've been trying to do is basically hold people where they are and not force them into a process we know hundreds would not be successful in. And the hundreds we're talking about are primarily social equity applicants right now who don't have access to the capital to do some of the improvements that building and safety or fire want them to do. And by opening up the relocation process and some of this other stuff, the hope was they could find a compliant location that would require less of a capital outlay to become compliant and be able to work towards that annual licensure.
Mr. Killeen, do you feel like these applicants / license holders were not aware of the building requirements going into the spaces? Why is it such a? It looks like it's a large scale issue we're dealing with here, and I'm just very concerned.
I mean, prior to the creation of DCR, the city never permitted or licensed commercial cannabis businesses. The prior policy was limited immunity. Limited immunity means you're still operating an unlicensed business, an illegal business. However, if you met certain registration requirements, the city wouldn't take an enforcement action against you. But these businesses weren't pulling building permits or fire permits or anything else because they were engaged in an illegal activity at the federal level. So even if they wanted to get permits, they couldn't have gotten permits for the activity they were engaged in because it wasn't recognized by the city. So by allowing the phase 1 and the phase 2 applicants to kind of be grandfathered and come in on the front end, we have hundreds of folks that are now trying to go through this process of pulling building and fire permits to comply that are running into issues they never anticipated. And from their perspective, hey, I was there and operating for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Why are you telling me now I have to put in fire sprinklers? Why are you telling me now that I have to do these build outs and the spacing and the backflow requirements and everything else? They're like, I never would have pursued this had you told me that. So it's a balancing act for us because again, the director can't tell building and safety, issue a permit, sign off on the C of O. Same thing for fire. And we've been.
So Jason, let me jump in here. Why the change? Because it was working for medical marijuana without the building and safety requirements. So who perpetuated that change?
The change was naturally perpetuated by establishing a regulated legal marketplace for these businesses to operate. It wasn't that these businesses didn't have to comply with fire or building code previously. There were unpermitted improvements to the locations to put in the infrastructure, especially for the non-retail. The difference was because it wasn't a recognized lawful activity, nobody would sign off on them engaging in those activities. And people did what they did. And I mean, it's like Michelle always tells me I have to explain things in terms that, our stakeholders can understand. You own a home and you decide that you want to expand your home and put in some additional bedrooms. Well, if you don't go through building and safety to get those rooms permitted, when you go to sell your home, it gets called out like this is unpermitted, and you can either pull the permits and come into compliance, or you need to demolish it and do what's necessary. That's what's our businesses are having to deal with. And the unfortunate thing right now is DCR doesn't have regulatory authority over building code, fire code. So we're checking our code to see if somebody's compliant. And you as a stakeholder say, hey, I know, individual A was leasing this location. They were doing cultivation. It's got to be good. So then I go and sign a lease for that location. And now I'm being told by fire and building, hey, it's going to cost $50,000 of improvements and permits and take you 2 years to do the build out to comply. And we're not going to sign off on your health permit until you do this capital outlay and you go through this permitting process. And what we've been kind of explaining to stakeholders and our policymakers, and it's really the policymakers that have to drive this home, is we need to put people in a position where they can get an answer from DCR to say thumbs up, thumbs down, and then they have the ability to then go to these other agencies to figure out what the requirements are before they make these big material decisions. And that's why we've got the pre-app review process. We've created the legal entities process so that people can get the paperwork out of the way first. And then they have up to a year to submit the application where they could do the research to find a compliant property, where they have the ability to figure out what they need to do so that when they do submit the application, it can move through our process as quickly as possible with as few hiccups, at least from DCR, but they also need to worry about these other agencies that DCR has no control over.
So I'm going to let Robert finish, and then I have a question for Michelle.
Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. It's a mess because you've got, and this is not a, isolated incident. This is widespread from what I understand. Imagine the cultivation facility that's up and running and they've got to do fire life safety. Let's just use sprinklers as an example. They're going to have to shut down operations. And imagine what happens to all those plants. That could put them out of business. And it just as an example. But I understand from the city's perspective, they want fire life safety, right?
Correct. And that's why DCR is making, so the folks that are operating under those temporary approvals didn't have to meet the C of O requirements and the other permitting requirements.
Yeah,
But they do have to meet it for the annual.
Right.
And you have to get your local annual in order to get your state annual. And if you don't get your state annual by 2025, you have to stop operating. So what we've proposed is creating a modified annual process that shifts that permitting requirements to the final inspection after we adopt the environmental which they need for their state. We've also made recommendations to extend the renewal period for our temporary approvals so that folks that are in phase 1, phase 2 that are having these issues with the other agencies on permitted issues have more time to comply and continue to operate under the temporary, but still we're not holding them up from getting their state annual, which they'll need to have in 2025. So they can operate with their local temporary, they can have their state annual, and then they can be working with these other agencies DCR has no control over. And hopefully by giving them through the end of 2027, plus doing some of these rejiggerings to allow for them to actually get their state annual license, we don't run into the issue where businesses have to wholesale shut down. And we have a new mayoral administration. We have a number of new council members. These policymakers have the ability to help shape policy on a go-forward basis to maybe relax some of the rules or help these businesses be successful, or talk to the directors of those departments to look for a pathway to make it easier. But unfortunately, DCR can't do that. We have to rely on the policymakers and make these recommendations and talk to them about the challenges with the hope that they utilize their power to kind of direct people to do other things.
All right. Well, thank you for the explanation. I think Vice President Mason had a question or comment.
Yes, for Director Garakian, Mr. Kaleem provided a great segue talking about dialogues with state regulators. Are we hearing anything about potential grants to help offset the costs of some of these build outs, since they were unforeseen and they are exorbitant?
Thank you for that question. We are monitoring one very important state bill right now, the extension of the provisional licensing introduced by Senator Bradford. It would be SB 51. Looks like they're going to be going into committee hearings very soon, and we're going to be very vocal on that. As for funding coming from the state, Dr. Brown is out today, but what she would tell you if she was here is that the pot for money from the state keeps getting smaller as more jurisdictions with social equity applicants keep coming online. Another challenge that we're going to be facing in 2024 is that any monies that we receive from the state must be matched from monies that we receive from the city. So we are okay for this year. If we receive any money from the state this year, we will be able to continue to fund our programs and some of the policies. The monies that we are receiving this year, we are planning to use almost entirely to some degree to offset fee waivers. So this is going to be for phase 3, round 1 and round 2 folks that are continuing to go through temporary approval or who are in the pre-app process, to help offload any fees associated with the pre-app process or the temporary approval process. And it could get, as we all know, it can get pretty expensive. So we're looking to offset those, and that's to help bring people into compliance quicker. If there is monies left over, I think this is something we can consider, but it's something I'll need to check with our legal on. So.
Okay.
Another thing is, Commissioner
Can I request
Mason,
that then as an agenda item? I would love to hear a report back on that from legal about the feasibility of that.
Another thing, it's important to mention too, and I would be absolutely remiss not to mention this, but we do currently have the SEED grant program, which, you know, Dr. Brown has been working on. It's a really incredible program. You know, every day I get emails signing off on $50,000 grants. You know, this is free money to, you know, social equity individual applicants who are going through our TA process. They can use that money for build out. They can use that money for TI. You know, that's $50,000. So it's already in the mix. So that's something that folks can use right now to help come into compliance. It is only available to social equity applicants, which, you know, is, I think, a great thing, because that's the folks that we want to see go through this process. Those are the folks that were most impacted by the war on drugs. That's what this program is intended for. You know, a lot of our phase one businesses are EMMDs. So not a lot of them are social equity applicants, so they're not going to be eligible for that SEED grant funding. So I think when we talk about a report back, we're going to have to see if we can think about making monies available to everyone, or if we want to do that, et cetera. We'll shape the report like that, Commissioner Mason.
Thank you. One of the things that came up in the interview that Dr. Brown completed with Dominic DePrima on KBLA was about outreach. So perhaps we need a billboard that the seed money is available, you know, just a thought. I'm sure she reported back to you on that, but a billboard would be nice.
Yeah, that's actually a great thing to think about. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we just have to go analog, old school, right? And just go with the billboard. So I agree with you. I'll talk to her about that. If we have something in the budget, I think it would be helpful to put it in to the areas that are the most disproportionately impacted area.
I would suggest having a conversation with that other city department that won an advertising award for the LA for All campaign, Department of Civil and Human Rights and Equity, and maybe they can, you know, if the model is already out there, why try and recreate it? Maybe you can borrow some outreach tips from them.
Oh, we are watching them really closely. What Capri has done with their department is really incredible and noble. In fact, we are currently putting together the RFP for our public information campaign, and it's modeled a lot around her outreach and the impacts that she's had with a very little budget. So we are monitoring them very closely. Great minds.
Thank you.
Truly an impressive campaign. So thank you guys for your questions. I really appreciate it, Commissioner.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
I did want to kind of piggyback on what Jason said, President, on
Sure.
in talking with other departments. You know, I don't want to throw our fellow departments on their bus. I want to be careful because everybody's going through their challenges. And as this industry is coming out of prohibition and they're starting to face the challenges of becoming a regulated business in the city of Los Angeles, you know, this is something that any business owner who's been doing business in the city of LA is like very aware of things that they need to do. But, you know, these are also challenges that we face with illegal enforcement, you know, and in talking with our other departments to ensure that they look at cannabis without prejudice. You know, it's not just, you know, cannabis and all the things associated with it, but these are folks that are running businesses. They are doing the good thing. They're coming into compliance. They're trying to make all the right moves, and we need to treat them as we would someone trying to build a shopping center or someone trying to build out their hair salon. So, you know, we hope the new administration coming on and a new deputy mayor, whomever it is going to help us kind of like rein in the cats on this issue, both on the illegal enforcement side and on the legal compliance side. And I also want to give a shout out to Rocky because she's been doing a lot of behind the scenes work with fire, with DBS, with planning on essentially trying to clear the way for our current licensees to get through this process in not a harmful or impactful way. So thank you, Rocky.
Yes, I echo that. I know
Rocky's been hard at work on the setting up the compliance section, and that's now up and running. So I just want to acknowledge Rocky and thank her for her work and contributions.
It should also be noted, and I know everybody is having a long day, but part of the amendments that Jason went over today with the annual licensing amendments, those have been restructured to accommodate for these challenges. And we really do hope that we are in the Planning and Land Use Committee soon, because our applicants are waiting not just for the guidance on our annual licensing program, but for guidance on a bunch of other stuff. And once we get that, we are off to the races running. We're having in-person weekly strategy meetings to talk about the implementation of our annual licensing plan. And we're just waiting for the sign up from council, literally, to get this going. So.
Understood. Before we adjourn, I think, Ms. Treviso, did you have an announcement?
Yes, President. Sorry, there's I just want to make an announcement to all commissioners and the public that our next commission meeting will be held in person. The meetings will be held in the boardroom on the 9th floor of 201 North Figueroa Street. So in compliance with the Brown Act, location, time, and place will be included in our agenda for the next meeting. Tentatively, we have the meeting scheduled for March 2nd. Our meetings are normally held the first and third Thursdays of the month. So those are the meeting dates starting in March.
Does that mean we are meeting in person from then on?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, with that, I want to thank my fellow commissioners for joining today and for your service. I want to thank Mr. Clean for his presentation and all the staff that made this meeting possible. Thank you so much for your work. The meeting is adjourned. The time now is 3:13.